Good afternoon. I will reconvene the regular meeting of the Board of Lane County Commissioners for Tuesday, August 6th. Welcome back, and welcome to anyone joining us this afternoon who wasn't with us for the morning portion of our meeting. We have one item from Public Works first up, and it is a 1:30 time certain. And for anyone watching, I understand we are making an attempt at this point. The plan is after this item, we'll likely have a brief recess and come back at 2 to continue business from this morning regarding charter amendments. But first we have item 10A, Public Works. This is a first reading and setting a public hearing on ordinance number 24-07. In the matter of amending Lane Code Chapter 11 to incorporate an allowance for permitted overnight sleeping within the urban growth boundary of Eugene and amend Lane Code 11.120 to be consistent with state law and adopting a savings and severability clause. And I will welcome our senior planner, Rachel Surslev, to walk us through this brief item.
Thank you, Chair Trieger, and good afternoon, Commissioners. Again, for the record, this is Rachel Surslev, Staff Planner, for this Lane Code Amendment project to allow overnight sleeping within the urban growth boundary of Eugene. Like was mentioned, this is a first reading on ordinance number 2407, also identified as Land Management Division file number 509PA24-05406. And this is a code amendment project initiated by the Land Management Division at the direction of the board. These amendments were prompted by a compliance action within the city of Eugene, where it became clear that while overnight sleeping was allowed within the municipal boundaries of Eugene, it was not allowed in the urbanizable areas, which are areas within the urban growth boundary. So in an effort to align the codes and allow for more temporary housing options within the urban growth boundary, the board directed staff to initiate this code amendment project. And therefore, we're before you today to present amended Chapter 11 Lane Code that allows for the same camping provisions that are allowed in the city of Eugene within the urbanizable area. And the item before you today is a first reading and a request that the board set a second reading and a public hearing for August 20th, 2024, time certain at 1:30 p.m. And at that time, staff will provide a more comprehensive staff report on the specific amendments, and we'll take public comment at that time as well. And that concludes my staff report. I'm happy to answer any questions about the project.
Great. Are there any other, any questions or any other information the board needs at this time? Vice Chair.
Yeah, I mean, it means we have some time right now, right? Just a little clarification for the public. This is not just allowing nilly-willy camping. This is permitted camping on a residence in a single family like RV or something like that. That is basically monitored by the city and the county, just to be clear, so the public knows we're not just authorizing camping wherever they want to camp.
That's correct. This is a program that already exists within the city of Eugene to allow camping on private property, and we're just going to adopt those same, or the proposal is to adopt those same regulations for the urbanizable area.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
I'm ready for a motion, Chair. I move to approve the first reading and set the second reading and public hearing for ordinance 2407 for August 20th, 2024, time certain 1:30 p.m.
Is there a second? I'll second. Thank you. It's been moved by Vice Chair and seconded by Commissioner Buck. Is there any discussion to the motion? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor say aye.
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 Motion carries 5-0, approving the first reading and setting a public hearing on ordinance number 24-07 in the matter of amending Lane Code Chapter 11 to incorporate an allowance for permitted overnight sleeping within the urban growth boundary of Eugene and to amend Lane Code 11.120 to be consistent with state law and adopting a savings and severability clause. Thank you. We will see you August 20th.
Thank you.
Au revoir.
Moving on to Commissioners' business. Are there any announcements from Commissioners this afternoon? I will just announce, Commissioner Senegal?
Sorry, yep. This weekend is the Scandinavian Festival in Junction City. That will be kicked off Thursday. Wednesday is Locals Night, and come support it. It's great.
Great, thank you. It's time for funnel cake. And then I want to make sure folks know or are reminded that Saturday from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. is Pride in the Park. That's at Alton Baker Park. 2 stages, hundreds of community booths, lots of just good community vibes, and I know Lane County will have a presence and a booth there as well, so encouraging folks to come and enjoy that really just joy-filled, inclusive event and visit the Lane County booth. Are there any future board assignment requests? Yes, Commissioner Farr.
I had one short item. In the way of announcement, Mr. Rickoff, I'm going to direct this toward you since you're in that seat today. Keir Miller. Last week, I had an opportunity to ask Keir to join me at a residence to describe precisely the steps that led to a decision that was made. I'm not going to go into too much detail about the decision, but Mr. Rickoff, Keir was so clear and so direct in his communication with the people who had the questions that at the end of the day, he really completely solved the issues that they had simply by being there for about 20 minutes. Keir did a superb job in articulating the reasons and articulating why it deviates somewhat from state law in this particular case. And at the end of the day, the residents were very satisfied with what Mr. Miller did. So pass that along, if you will.
Please do. Thank you.
Are there any future board assignment requests? Seeing none, there are no assignments to review then. Is there any other business before the board before we take a recess? Seeing none. Have you heard from staff? Can we confirm that 2 o'clock is the time to reconvene?
2 o'clock is the time to reconvene. Yes.
Here in Harris Hall.
Here in Harris Hall.
Great. Then at the sound of my gavel, we are in recess until 2 p.m., at which time we'll come back to continue business on a potential charter amendment. Thank you. We are in recess.
Hang with that.
Good afternoon. I will reconvene this regular meeting of the Board of Lane County Commissioners for Tuesday, August 6th, 2024. We are back with a continuation of an item from this morning. That was item 8A, County Administration Discussion and Order 24-08-06-06 in the matter of referring to elections, an amendment to the Lane County Home Rule Charter. And I will turn it over to staff for a quick reminder of where we are in the process.
Thank you, Chair. Judy Williams, Chief of Staff. As you stated, Chair, we were here as direction from this morning to work on revisions to Order 24-08-06-06 with revisions on the feedback from Legal Counsel and the Charter Review Committee, using all of the revisions outlined by Attachment C from Miller Nash and items 2, 3, 4, and 5 from the Charter Review Committee be provided to the county clerk for the November 5th, 2025 ballot. And new material was posted online. So in the packet with the agenda materials for today, in this item number 8A, under the new material, the new information starts on page 49. It says amended material right there, and then thereafter, starting on number 50, has that adjusted charter amendment language, board order, and following ballot title. And I will now turn it over to both Steve Thiel first to explain some of those edits that were made.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair and Commissioners. So first, I will direct you to the now revised board order, and I'll mention relatively small changes. In the third paragraph, added language that would, quote, for the 2026 general election and thereafter. So plugged that into, there's no word limitation issues on this, so simply plugged new language in there that calls for a formation for the 2026 general election. Then in the ballot title language, once again, there are strict limitations on words there, primarily, both in the question and the summary. So the question has been amended to state, shall Lane County amend the Lane Charter to create redistricting commission, redistrict for 2026, thereafter redistrict after each decennial census. That's a 20-word limitation there. So the wording sometimes ends up being a little bit clunky, but nonetheless, I think we got it all in there in a clear and understandable way. On the summary, that's a 175-word limitation there. So added language, quote, to develop Board of Commissioner districts for the 2026 general election, and then thereafter each year, going on with some of the language that was already in there. Making room for that in a 175-word limit by removing some prepositions, some A's, things like that here and there, maintaining that it's still understandable and it still is coherent and makes sense, but adding that additional information there. Yanni.
Chair Trieger, Commissioners, I was able to revise the charter language that would be for proposed amendment to the actual charter language. Consistent with the direction from the board this morning, we added the language back that was sort of unanimously rejected from the Charter Review Committee, and that was the language to include a mid-cycle redistricting effort. Starting in 2030, there are very prescriptive dates for when these events are to occur, when you select the commissioner or the commission, when you notice and search for applicants, in order to create some flexibility so that staff has some flexibility, and also just so that we weren't being overly prescriptive given the sort of tightened timeframe between now and the 2026 general election. We added some general language that would include that basically any time that there was something that was ordered that should occur, that it should occur at least 6 months prior to the 2026 general election. It should occur so that allowed that the work of the committee shall be done at least 6 months prior to the 2026 general election. election. We chose that language at least 6 months prior to the 2026 general election because the current charter uses language in the current format. The commissioners who do the redistricting, the deadline is 6 months prior to the next election when the new districts will occur. So we use that 6-month timeframe to sort of use a guidepost for the 2026 general election. So anytime there is a specific date that needs to occur that is prescriptive starting in 2030. However, for 2026, we created a little bit more flexibility to account for some of that burden on staff so that they can adjust the deadlines and the dates that will be necessary to get that work done. That was the main change that we made from the original proposed charter amendment language that was in your packet. We're happy to answer any questions about that.
Thank you, council. To the board. Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Vice Chair. And thank you for what seems like fairly minimal changes to the original language, both on the order and on the ballot title. My question is regarding future elections. Let's project to 2055. And that board has found a reason to redistrict in between the centennials. Does this still allow them to do that?
Chair Trigger, Commissioner Farr, as it is currently drafted, it does not.
It does not. See,
No.
that is a bit of an issue for me. I think I can probably live with it, but to me, it wasn't just this one redistricting. It's a matter of, if something arises that really causes a need to, new information surfaces, for instance, that causes a future board, many years from now, reason to redistrict in between the prescribed times in the charter. I guess their hands are tied on that. We're tying the hands of future boards to not be able to do that. Is that right?
Chair Trigger, Commissioner Farr, as the language is, well, first of all, the instruction that we received from the motion this morning, we understood that we were to make revisions to make it possible to do a midterm redistricting for the 2026 general election. So that's why the language is specific. In terms of future elections, the specific language going forward is that the commission, the redistricting commission would be created no later and no more often than December 31st, and each year ending in the number 0, which is that 10-year restriction that would prohibit the midterm redistricting efforts going forward. Do you have anything to add or disagree with that interpretation?
No, I agree.
Okay, thank you. And that's clear, and that seems consistent with the instructions you were given. It's a little bit troublesome to me, but I'm one person on that.
Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to express my extreme disappointment that we are here today looking at this board order and not respecting the committee's request for more time to review all the ins and outs of the independent redistricting committee as they've requested. I'm also disappointed that we're not providing the public a public hearing on this order and not getting additional input. It's clear that there's a rush specifically to incorporate a mid-cycle redistricting, which can only be politically motivated. There is really no need to rush another redistricting at this time. We shouldn't be governing this way. This isn't the way the county should govern for the people of Lane County. It is a horribly rushed process, and we're not transparent to the public by getting public input through a hearings process. I can't believe that we are in this position today. This should not be happening, and we should be giving it due time and process in order to make a committee that really incorporates all the language that the committee wanted to provide, the time and resources that they've requested, as well as a fully public, transparent process. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to note, I mean, everybody's got their own feelings about this. I just want to make sure that I've got mine out there as well. The committee is there for recommendations to the board. The committee has not been given the authority to give us absolutes on how the Board of County Commissioners votes or decides. That's up to us based on who elected us, over 75,000 people in each of our districts. Secondly, the reason we're here mostly is because there is a commissioner whose political strategist was on the last board, and their wives. And to me, that just makes sure that the political selection system of voting maps is going to be slighted regardless. So I'm wanting to go on public record saying, I don't want that to happen again. I want it to be more neutral. I want it to be more fair. I want it to be more objective. And I want it to be democratic. That's why we're putting this in front of the voters today. Thank you, Chair.
Commissioner Senega.
Thank you. I would just like to take a second, thank staff for coming back with this. Really appreciate you working with us, and great job. I think it's a great proposal, and I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, echo that appreciation. And I'm going to make a couple of comments that we didn't have time to really dig into some of the substantive potential challenges with this, but also weave in a couple of things that some of my colleagues have just mentioned. Commissioner Farr talked about future boards. Should this pass, in fact, it's out of the hands of the board to redistrict completely. This proposal, as it's written, as I understand it, seats a committee that the board has zero hand in selecting any members. Our current process selects, the board selects a seated group that then selects the rest. But the commission would have, the Board of County Commissioners would have zero input to membership of this committee. And Vice Chair stated the committee is there to give us advisement, not absolutes. That's up to us, but in fact, we're ceding that by the creation of the committee as it's written in this amendment, because again, the committee would say, this is the map to adopt. It takes the commissioners out of any part. And I absolutely agree with the goal of being arm's length, and maybe that arm needs to be longer. I absolutely agree that there are challenges with how the committee's seated to ensure as close as possible to neutrality. We didn't do it perfectly before, but we sure did better. We tested it once. Some people didn't like the result. We have a chance to refine it, but we're giving up that opportunity if we adopt this today. There are a number of components of this, again, that we didn't get to this morning. And so I just want to get on the record, and also for my colleagues to consider before we move forward, because we've on this, just for consideration, that if we took more time, we could be addressing and not, in fact, obligating future boards to some of the challenges inherent in this as it's written. There are a number of items in here which I think leave too much, are too vague, and opportunities to be out of compliance. For instance, naming there shall be 15 commissioners and 5 alternates. We could easily become out of compliance with the charter if an insufficient number were to be available to fill those seats, so we don't have language saying something like at least this many or something like that. The very prescriptive nature of who is not allowed to serve, I understand it's sort of getting at the concern Vice Chair raised. However, I think there are other ways to get at that a little more, in a more focused, practical way without putting it in our charter. Because the process we currently have in our code doesn't obligate the membership. It is a process for selecting them. So we could improve the process to avoid the perceived issue that Vice Chair raised. But for example, Section D, Section 1, Item D, Roman numeral 1, a holder of or current candidate for federal, state, or county or other elected office that uses the commission district boundaries. It doesn't put any time limit on that. So is that ever? Lane Community College uses our district boundaries. Does that mean someone who served on the Lane Community College Board a decade earlier could never serve on this commission? Similarly, it talks about an officer, employee, or paid consultant of a political party. Does that mean someone who was paid to canvass, do some get out the vote canvassing part-time for 3 weeks when they were in college is forever prohibited from serving on such a commission? It mentions a registered lobbyist. I registered as a lobbyist a few years in a row when I worked for a nonprofit advocacy organization that did state work, because nonprofits do that as a way to cover their bases and count up their lobbying hours to be compliant with their tax exempt status, but it doesn't mean it was my full-time job to go lobby and lobbying the state legislature on issues that don't come before this board. So that these are just a few examples of some things in here that I think are important and that our Charter Review Committee offered to dig deeper and get greater clarity to bring us a better product around how we do redistricting in Lane County, but we're going to lose that ability if we rush this forward now. A couple of other, similarly, a legislative or campaign contractor or staff of the contractor. All of us have had printed materials. Are those printers contractors? How do we know if someone is so an employee of a local printing company who might print political material is ineligible for ever serving on such a commission forever? Does it have to be in certain proximity to an election? There's just a lot of detail missing that we could really be tying the hands of this commission, ourselves, and future boards. And these are examples of why these sorts of things don't belong, I believe, in our charter. There are a couple of other pieces like that. Oh, here's a really critical one. I'm just trying to track between the notes on the materials from earlier and the revised, so excuse me just a minute. Letter P under, still in section 1, I think it is, yes. Letter P, the citizens redistricting, shall adopt final maps. So again, the committee will draw and adopt, leaving these commissioners completely out. Some think that's a good idea, but that also means there's zero accountability for voters if they don't like the outcome. But in any case, it mentions that if unforeseen circumstances delay adoption of the final maps, the Citizens Redistricting Commission shall continue until final maps are adopted. Unforeseen circumstances, that's a little bit of a vague term. What about foreseen circumstances? When is it unforeseen versus foreseen? Something's coming down the pike we anticipate, like what happened in 2020. We were in the midst of a pandemic. We knew the census data wasn't going to be out because, again, redistricting is about apportionment. At what point was that, did it move from unforeseen to foreseen? The pandemic was unforeseen, but not having the census data was at some point foreseen. There's just an awful lot of language in here that I'm very uncomfortable with and do not think is practicable or responsible to put in a charter. But that doesn't mean I'm opposed to this concept. I'm just opposed to the timeline of pushing to put it before the voters when it's really, we could be doing so much better. Any other comments from the board? Questions? Questions for staff? I will also then just remind or ask my colleagues to take a moment to revisit, if they haven't carefully, the memo from our county clerk, which is on page 17 of the packet, in which she lays out, and I hope we can all agree, there is absolutely no motivation there other than to ensure proper operation of that office, where she lays out grave concerns and challenges and skepticism of the ability to manage what is being asked of her if we force through this mid cycle redistricting. Commissioner Farr.
Thanks, and I just wanted to address that a little bit. And during the discussion this morning, I asked if removing, this memo was written from the county clerk prior to the recommendations of the CRC. So the county clerk didn't see the recommendations that actually took the county clerk's office out of many of the items of workload. And I'm looking at the closing paragraph that the county clerk stated, and it says, in closing, introducing tasks outside of the normal scope of election management within the proposed timeline poses significant risk to the integrity. Tasks in general, not this specific task, but any tasks. And it really seems to be aimed toward the workload of the existent staff and the office that as it exists. So removing some of the work, which the CRC's recommendation did, then certainly affected the workload of the county clerk's office. And additionally, as that closing paragraph, it's a 5-line paragraph, the last line says, as well as potential adoption of ranked choice voting. So what the county clerk is talking about is different things that could insurmountably increase the workload of the clerk's office. It's not specific to this amendment, it's specific to adding tasks to the workload, including the adoption of ranked choice voting. So to me, I asked the question this morning, does this remove the onerous nature of adding workload to the county clerk's office? And the answer seemed to be yes. Would that the clerk were here to answer those questions, but as we move down the road, I'd like to say once again, in closing, introducing tasks, not this task, tasks. And it does include ranked choice voting, which is certainly not this task.
Thank you, Commissioner. I think since you bring up and quote it, I think for the sake of absolute clarity, quoting it in full is actually what's most beneficial, because you left out the middle section, which does speak to the challenges of this proposal before us. So, because it is a timeline issue, and that is the part you left out. Should the Charter Review Committee advance this amendment, I respectfully urge reconsideration of the timeline to better synchronize with the election calendar and the implementation of new election management and so on. And she lays out the calendar and what the challenges would be therein. Because, of course, if this goes to voters this November and passes, as she points out, beginning with December 3rd of this year, or excuse me, December 2nd of this year is the deadline to certify the presidential election results and begin the hand count audit of the presidential election. So immediately there would be work happening that impacts her office related to the timeline of a mid-decennial redistricting. And again, she doesn't put it in this statement, but in the meeting that I watched, she stated she has never seen a mid-decennial redistricting done, that it's completely outside the standards of her profession. So I think it's just important to put if we're going to put her own words out there, that we include the totality of her statement and the concerns that are not addressed if we move this forward. Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. On this particular topic, I just think the board needs to be perfectly clear that this is going to require significantly more resources for the elections department in order to process. That money has to come from somewhere. And with the financial issues that we're having this year in our budget, we're going to have to actually take a hard look at where those resources are coming from. It's going to require more people in that department, time, energy, legal fees, because we're going to have county council work on this. That means deferring other work that they would normally be doing. This is going to cost taxpayers money to redistrict next year in a mid-cycle. I'd like to know exactly how much that's going to be. I'm pretty sure taxpayers are very interested in knowing exactly how much it will cost as well. The results of which, if there are new maps drawn, that means additional ballot splits that are not anticipated, and that's a large workload in and of itself, right, in the middle of election cycles. This is complicated and expensive.
Commissioner Senega.
Yeah, I would just like to reiterate what I mentioned earlier and Commissioner Farm mentioned this time. When I asked staff, the county clerk read the harangue and long in its entirety before revision 3 was brought up. The committee recommends that the role of the county clerk, as described in the proposal, be largely confined to supporting the redistricting committee, and that the references in the proposal is that the county clerk be replaced with the county or Lane County to help distribute that workload. So to say that the county clerk is still taking all the workload of the harangue and long proposal isn't correct, because we've added line 3 in there to remove some of that workload. So I mean, I just, for everybody that hasn't read it, that's what is stated there. Thank you. I'm ready to make a motion. And this is, Mr. Thiel, would you like me to say approve as written currently or as been rewritten? The board order. I move to approve order 24080606 as written or as modified?
As it has been amended.
As it has been amended. Okay. I move to approve order 24080606 as has been amended to be provided to the county clerk for the November 5th, 2024 ballot.
I'll second that.
Been moved by Commissioner Senega and seconded by Vice Chair. Is there any discussion to the motion? Commissioner Farr.
Thank you. And just a reiteration that we're not passing an ordinance here. We're asking for something placed on the ballot for the entire voting population to weigh in on. It's not the end of the discussion. The discussion really is just beginning on what is being placed on the ballot, just like any ballot. And I'll restate it, and I don't think I'm wrong when I say that the ultimate democratic process is what happens at the ballot box on Election Day. Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion to the motion, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify with an aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Nay. Motion carries 3-2 with Commissioners Buck and Trieger voting against. Thank you again so much, staff. Ms. Williams, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to, and this may be okay with head nods, but consistent with the direction for the other repeal sections that you did move forward, we did ask at that time if, now that there's a decision and direction made on this item, is this something you also want to place on the state voters pamphlet? If so, consistent with the other 3 repeals that last time the board considered giving that authority to the county administrator to create an explanatory statement committee for those items. So that would be what would happen next if there's, if it's the board's desire to include this in the state voters pamphlet and have staff work on that.
Clarifying question. Do we know if it's, so are the choices to have it, if it's on the ballot, the choice is, do we want to put explanatory statements in the statewide voter pamphlet, yes or no? That's what you're asking for direction on whether we want to do that.
Yes.
Okay. And we already did give the direction that we do for the 3 repeal items. Is that right? So you're only asking about this one item?
Correct.
Thank you.
Yes.
If I may add,
Please.
just for clarification, ultimately forming the committee to draft that explanatory statement and having it referred to the Secretary of State for inclusion will require an order. So my understanding, I was absent for that meeting. My understanding is with the head nods for the last time around for the repeals, we're directing the county administrator to lay out that process and organize that process, but didn't actually place that explanatory statement in the voters pamphlet.
Thank you. So is the order to place it, or is the order the language of the statement? Is the order to create the committees to draft the language, or is it the language itself?
The former. It would be to form the committee, and then there's nothing necessarily in law that would require the final language to come back before the board before it was sent to the Secretary of State.
So that sounds like something, correct me if I'm wrong, that could be on our consent agenda for the 20th of August or the 27th even. We have time. That's not the same or is that, what, timeline-wise, what do we need?
Yes, and Ms. Williams can correct me if I'm wrong here. My understanding is that so the deadline, first of all, is noon on the 27th.
Okay.
The last time you guys would have an opportunity to address that would be the 20th. And then it's just a matter of, is that enough time to form whatever, form a 3 to 5 member committee and to draft that explanatory statement.
And you need the order to form the committee, or are the head nods sufficient to form the committee, and the order on the 20th codifies that work?
The order would be required to form the committee.
To form the committee. So we would have an item on our August 20th agenda, because that's the next time we meet, that would put in place the process to form committees to write these explanatory statements for now 4 measures, 4 amendments, and then the following week, noon, is the deadline for those. So the committee has to be formed, seated, do the work, submit the work in 1 work week.
Correct. And you may remember last time we discussed this, the law requires that it be a balanced committee, whether it's 3 or 5 members, there needs to be equal number of members who are in favor of the provision, equal and opposed, and 1 neutral. And so it may be very, very difficult to seat 1 commission or committee that has that balance for each of the 4 ballot measures that have been forwarded.
And what is the ultimate result or consequence if we can't? The items are still on the ballot without statements?
Correct.
Thank you. Any questions from the board?
Yeah,
Commissioner Seniga?
I'm going to have to go through this again, but I thought I read somewhere where we could choose one. Are you saying what was in the board packet isn't correct? Because I thought in here we could, it was stated that we could choose county administrator or choose a committee that was balanced or in support of. Is that?
I believe, Commissioner, when we voted to put the repeal measures on, we clarified that we could delegate the responsibility to the administrator to seat that committee and make sure that the work happened. It didn't have to come back to us like a usual committee appointments where we vote to approve who's part of that committee, that was what we agreed to do in service to keeping the work moving forward. But it sounds like without the order, the administrator can't do that. And that's what needs to come back to us on the 20th. Is that right, Council?
That's correct. And I'm reviewing my prior notes just to make sure I'm giving you accurate information here, Commissioner.
Yeah, I'm trying to find them also.
My understanding, Chair Trieger and Commissioners, and looking at what we did at the last charter review 10 years ago, my understanding is we had board orders that seated the committees, named who was on those committee members and that language at that same time in one board order. And so that was my attempt after finishing this work was, it's August 6th, but we do already have some interested folks that are willing to do that. So I think that gives us that time frame to bring it back to you on the 20th with who it is and hopefully that language. So you have that too.
Okay, so the work can happen, and then you bring that to us with the order on the 20th, and that's what makes it official, so that it can be submitted by the noon on the 27th. I'm hearing a little bit of conflicting, that's why I'm looking to.
Yeah, and I want to make sure that we get this right. So in looking at the code, the explanatory statement, if inclusion in the Secretary of State's voter pamphlet of an explanatory statement, that requires an order. The formation of or appointment of the committee is the board shall appoint. So ultimately, there needs to be an order involved, but there may be a way for the board to appoint the committee. You'll need to convene to do that. But not necessarily, I suppose by order would be the logical way to do that as well.
So delegating that authority to the administrator is what we did last time. And the official appointment of that committee is in the order that you would bring us on the consent calendar on the 20th. Is what I'm understanding.
I think that would work, yes.
Commissioner Farr.
I'm just making sure we have consistency in the instruction we've been given. It says the board delegated the county administrator to establish an explanatory committee to work on explanatory statements for each of the 3 charter amendments. Just changes now to 4. So what you're saying is that still stands. We have delegated the county administrator to form the committee. The only thing that needs a board order is when the committee is formed, the membership of the committee. Is that correct?
Yes, well, yes, because the board has to appoint that board.
Correct. But it doesn't stop the county administrator from starting now in selecting the committee to put forward with that board order. He doesn't have to wait until then to begin work on that. Okay, that's fine.
I think that's correct. And my understanding is that that's what occurred for the repeal.
That's good. That gives me clarity that the county administrator can move forward with this subsequent head nod, which you've already received, to form the committee to now establish an explanatory committee to work on explanatory statements for each of the 4 charter amendments. Okay, good.
Great.
Thank you.
Anything else from staff on this item? No. Okay, thank you all. All right. Puts us at item 13. Is there any other business before the board today? From the board? Seeing none, to county administrator. Seeing none, then I just need to pull up my read-in. We do have a 3 p.m. time certain executive session. Board of County Commissioners will meet in executive session to consider information or records that are exempt by law from public inspection and to consult with counsel regarding the rights and duties of a public body with regard to current litigation or litigation likely to be filed. This executive session is held pursuant to ORS 192.6602F and ORS 192.6602H, which allows the Board of Commissioners to meet in executive session for the purposes listed. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are precluded from attending. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive session, except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. Members of the news media are not allowed to tape, video record, or otherwise record an executive session. Verbatim notes are prohibited. No decision may be made in executive session. We reserve the right to come back out into public session should the need arise. At the sound of my gavel, we will be adjourned until our executive session at 3 p.m. And after that, we are not scheduled to be meeting next week. So our next regular Board of County Commissioners meetings are Tuesday, August 20th and or Wednesday, the 21st.